Hello and welcome to another episode of the Georgian Book Club. Now, I know we said Janice would be along next with The Infernal Desire Machine of Dr. Hoffman, but I finished Tom Jones first, so... And I really am wanting to bring Tom Jones because it's a reread and I have lots of thoughts, lots and lots of thoughts. So I get to do this and Janice can finish her book after. Anyway, so before we start, remember there is our shop where we have writing services and books. There is also our Redbubble shop where we have over 100 designs. So if you want to support us, you can support us there. Otherwise, there is like, comment, subscribe, and share these videos. Those all help with getting this out there. So, this one was a reread. There is a Tom Jones video already on the channel right back 5 years ago, from 2020 when we started this. So why am I redoing Tom Jones? Well, partly I wanted to reread it. I first read Tom Jones about 25 years ago when I was about 19, 20. I watched the BBC adaptation and bought the book. I did that a lot when I was a teenager. That's how I read Pride and Prejudice. That's how I got started reading Dickens. And Tom Jones was one of those works that's how I found it, is I watched TV and I found this book and then I read it. So my copy of Tom Jones is the Penguin tie-in for that TV series, and it has pickies inside it. So that's how long Tom Jones has actually been in my life. So I'm not actually taking that first video down. Why? Because that video talks about, the way that I talk about Tom Jones in that video is very much, this is what I remember of the book and how I had read that 20 years earlier. Now, 25 years later, I went back to the book and I didn't actually read this copy again. I sort of was a bit hopeful that I mightn't get moving the bookmark along with my listening, but I actually listened to it, and I listened to it going to and from work, and it was coming home from work on Thursday that I finally finished it, and I was like, oh, okay, so we're going to have to do Tom Jones. So listening to it was really interesting. Listening to it with my current knowledge of 18th century literature was even more interesting. So, if you don't know, Tom Jones tells the story of Thomas Jones, who is a foundling. He is found by the Squire Allworthy, Thomas Allworthy, who bestows his name on him and brings him up as an adopted son. Squire Allworthy having lost both his wife and all the children that they had in infancy, and then lost his wife. He is a widower. He has no desire to marry again, but he looks upon this baby that is placed in his bed when he returns home from a visit to London as providential, and he brings the child up in his household. Now, he has a spinster sister who later marries a Captain Bliffle, and she has a child with him. So Tom and Bliffle are brought up together, and Tom is a very, very charming, good-natured child. He is generous, he is fairly willful, he has high spirits, but he never actually means harm, and when harm occurs through inadvertent actions of his, he does always try to rectify that. Unfortunately for Tom, those around him, not his adopted father, Squire Allworthy, but those around him, see him and his birth as an excuse to treat him meanly, including Blifil, who is a little younger than he is, and they've been brought up in the household together. His own father has died. He was a very odious man, and he was felled by a stroke while out at work, out on a walk, contemplating exactly how much he should get once Squire Allworthy dies. Squire Allworthy living at least another 20 years, for he's alive at the end of the book, well outlives Blifil, Captain Blifil. So young Master Blifil likes to bring up the fact that Tom is a bastard. The Reverend Thwackum, who Squire Allworthy has teaching his boys, who's a vicar who hasn't got a actual vicarage. He's basically a sponger. Squire Allworthy is ends up fairly open to these sponging individuals. That's how Blifil got into the household. His brother was one of the people whom Squire Allworthy took pity on and invited in, and he would have liked to have married Bridget Allworthy, except that he had a wife living. The Reverend Thwackum is most severe. There is also Squire, who is a philosopher, and he likewise is quite severe on Tom. The Reverend Thwackum is actually very much, he's not just severe on Tom, he's abusive, he is a hitter. He is a man who sees Tom's nature as being inherent from birth, and therefore ill use of the boy is considered appropriate, to the point that Allworthy has to step in and stop Thwackum beating Tom on one occasion, and actually compensates him by buying him a horse, which he sells, but not for ill means, but to preserve Black George, who's the responsibility of who's the one who ended up getting him beaten in the first place. So we see Tom, but we see Tom's goodness is quite disparate, and we see this for a while yet. So Tom becomes a great favourite of Squire Weston, who has the estate neighbouring, and Squire Weston has a daughter called Sophia. Sophia has been in town most of this time, but now she has returned to the countryside, to Somersetshire, and she is 17, and Tom falls in love with her. Now, this, just because Tom falls in love with her, doesn't really stop the fact that Tom is also a young man with appetites, and Tom has been messing about with George Seagram's daughter, Molly, and is now having got her pregnant, or at least that's what everyone believes. And so Tom is a little wild and imprudent, but he is very much attracted to Sophie. Now, Squire Weston has decided that he would like to marry his daughter off to Mr. Blifil, and that way combine both estates. And Mr. Blifil, although he doesn't care less about Sophie, is, like his father, influenced by money. Now, the great crisis of the novel occurs when Blifil, using his influence, using also a particular piece of information that was supposed to be passed on to Squire Allworthy but was not, he uses this to get Tom banished from the household, turned out of doors. by Squire Allworthy. And so thus begins Tom's adventures on the highways and byways. So in essence, there is a similarity in that in terms of Joseph Andrews. Joseph Andrews ends up leaving his home, his place of employment, and then travelling back from London to the estate in search of his beloved. Whereas Tom is more, he has no fixed position. He at first attempts to go to Bristol, then he encounters soldiers and then thinks, oh, well, maybe I'll go to the wars. The Jacobite Rebellion is happening. It's 1745 that this novel happens. It has a very definite date. That's another thing. This is a very, very, very situated in a very particular world at a very particular time, which is not all that usual for novels of this period. So all of these, he has various disparate adventures. He picks up Partridge as a travelling companion. Partridge is the man who is reputed to be his father, but he completely disavows anything of having been the father of Jones. And his motive is, well, maybe if I can effect a reconciliation between Tom and Mr. Allworthy, I will get my place back, because he lost his school as he was being accused of and took the blame as being, or he sort of ended up having to take the blame regardless of the fact that he constantly denied being the father of Tom. And he lost his school and he lost his position, and his wife died, and he's been all over the various places in the past 20 years trying to scrape together a living. And he meets Tom after Tom is hit by one of the soldiers, and he's at this point a barber surgeon, and he's been brought in to, see if Tom will survive or not, because he's in an inn. So he becomes Tom's traveling companion. He sort of sits in this odd position of, he's not exactly a servant. He calls himself Tom's friend, but at the same time he does do a lot of the offices of a servant, and his status is clearly that of a man who is more used to being in that sort of service position. Whereas Tom, in spite of being thrown out of doors and being rendered penniless, or just about penniless, by Black George's theft of the £500 in the pocketbook which Squire Allworthy left him, Tom's bearing, his manner, his way of being in the world, having been brought up in the Squire's household as a adopted child, means that the way people relate to him is as a gentleman. He is never treated as a servant, never treated as a vagabond. And actually this is really important at the end of the story, in spite of the fact that really he is a vagabond. He is homeless and he is penniless. And yet he manages to, by appearances, to get his way through the world in a way that is more tolerable than if he were subject to poor laws. So a lot of this book is about appearance, and the way appearance has people treat you. So in the meantime, while Tom has been out deciding exactly where he will go and having some adventures, Sophie back home has refused to marry Mr. Bliffle and has run away. She's going to run away to London to avoid this marriage. So contrary to what a lot of people would perceive, Tom and Sophie don't end out on the road seeking one another in a romantic connection. Tom is always does always think of Miss Weston, Miss Sophia Weston, and he doesn't ever stop his fidelity to her image. But at the same time, until we get to the inn at Upton, he is a man alone in the world, and when he happens to engage with Mrs. Waters, and Mrs. Waters, a very handsome, slightly older lady, probably in her 30s, she sees Tom and she decides, well, Mrs. Waters is a lady of the world, that, well, this could be a nice little diversion. And this actually gives us one of the most famous images, is the meal where Tom eats and Mrs. Waters flirts until Tom realizes, oh, she's flirting with me. And we know that it eventually got into his head, because the next we see is Mr. Fitzpatrick, who who is searching for his missing wife, bursts into their room accusing Tom of being with his missing wife. She's not his wife, she's Mrs. Waters. But Mrs. Fitzpatrick is at the inn at Upton, and so too is Sophia and Honor. The inn at Upton is a really key point in the narrative, because it changes Tom's focus. So anyway, because he has no idea Sophia is on the road at all, and he has no idea of why she is on the road at all either. So at the inn at Upton, various different upsets occur. Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mrs. Waters eventually hook up. Mr. Fitzpatrick being in want of a wife, and Mrs. Waters being without a husband at the moment, common law or otherwise, decides that, the Irish peer, I'll take that. Which is just as well that she does. Sophie leaves before anyone is up, but she leaves her muff for Tom, having heard that Tom is in the household, but having also heard from Partridge one lady is enough, and she thinks that he must be being prostituted, which upsets her. Mrs. Fitzpatrick sneaks out, and Mrs. Fitzpatrick and Sophia are cousins. They meet on the road to London. Mr. Fitzpatrick takes up with Mrs. Waters and they head to Bristol. Mr. Weston does turn up at the inn at Upton in the morning after Sophia has already left, and Tom discovers that he has missed Sophia. Not that he really thought that he would be missing Sophia, but this suddenly focuses his attention. It focuses his attention, which up until here has been very disparate. The story continues on until everybody is in London. And it's in London through various different meetings and machinations that everything ends up tied up happily ever after. Mr. Allworthy is apprised of Blifil's villainy. He discovers the true parentage of Tom, which is that Tom is the eldest son of his sister and another young man who he had in his household, who he was entirely unaware of his sister and this young man's love affair, and that the young man died. He died of smallpox and left his sister pregnant and bereft, and that his sister had conspired with Jenny Jones to conceal her pregnancy, conceal the birth, and have Tom brought up in her own household so that she can, trusting to her brother's goodness that he would do this in spite of the fact that everyone else counselling around him is saying, oh no, just turn it out to the parish, it'll be fine. Bridget Allworthy has conspired to make sure that her son is brought up in her household so that she can bring up her own, the child of her and the man she loved. And this she confesses, and this is what causes Belliffle to betray Tom to Mr. Allworthy. Squire, who is dying, he's gone to Bath for the waters, and he feels the need to confess his part in this villainy. And finally Jenny Jones reveals the whole thing, so that although we get a moment where Tom is, thanks to Partridge, suddenly identifying Mrs. Fitzpatrick, as she now is, or says she is, although we owe Partridge telling Tom, oh, is that the woman you slept with at Upton? That's your mother. And this makes Tom really quite distressed. He's already in prison because he has been forced into a duel with Mr. Fitzpatrick. And there are conflicting accounts about whether or not Mr. Fitzpatrick will survive. Jenny Jones comes, Mrs. Waters, Mrs. Fitzpatrick. She's very changeable in her position. She's quite happy to adopt a new guise wherever, which will allow her to survive. She is very much, no, okay, right. Now I know who you are. I can explain this to you, to Tom. So Tom is not left in this terrible position. Surely the devil himself cannot conspire something worse. And ultimately Sophia, who has been under the protection of Lady Bellaston, who has also been using Tom for her own ends, she is eventually reconciled to her family, but also she is then able to marry, Tom is able to marry her once Tom is elevated and returned to his rightful position, a rightful position he did not know, but he has earned now. And so it's this big, interesting story, but this time reading it, what's really interesting is it's very much a novel, a narrative. And partly I'd never realized that reading it before, because on the back of my copy, it says, Tom takes to the road on a picaresque journey through 18th century England while Sophia attempts to flee her destinies. I had taken the term picaresque as a naive reader 25 years ago to assume that the book was a picaresque. Because I'd never read any 18th century writing before, this is the first 18th century novel I ever read, I took that word at face value. Now, I've read more 18th century novels now, and this is not a picaresque. This is a novel. So what would be a picaresque? Daniel Defoe writes picaresques. If you start pulling bits and pieces out of Moll Flanders, for instance, so long as you don't pull certain key instances, like the marrying her brother, a lot of it, some of those marriages that she has, you could dump. And you wouldn't actually mar the arc of the novel. Also, Moll Flanders doesn't change. Joseph Andrews is a picaresque. Very much a picaresque. There are events that happen in Joseph Andrews that if you pulled them out and dumped it to the wayside, it wouldn't lose that much. But Tom Jones is a novel. Why is it a novel? If you start pulling at it, pulling things out, like if you lose any element of this, you lose a lot, you lose the cause and effect. It is a novel, but it is an early novel. So because it is an early novel, you don't get that same really hard narrative arc. You don't get the really strong character development that we would sort of expect. We would expect that there would be some sort of obvious development in many of the characters. Tom is charming and lovely at the beginning. Tom is charming and lovely at the end. Mrs. Waters, Jenny Jones, is what she is. A fairly pragmatic woman who is going to survive. Mr. Allworthy is always good. So, because they have these immutable characteristics, we assume that, oh, there is no character arc. But reading it this time, what you realise is actually there is a character arc. There are a lot of different elements in this book that mirror one another. And ultimately, what's interesting is that this is a far more moral book than I think its reputation has. Now, I say this because who is Fielding's great rival? Who is Fielding's great rival? Richardson. Richardson is Henry Fielding's great rival. He's written 2 books, a pamphlet-y thing, Shamala, and Joseph Andrews rebuking Pamela. What's Richardson's other big book is Clarissa, and Clarissa is a story of sexual conquest and inconstancy. And Clarissa ends with everybody damned and dead and punished for their sexual inconstancy. Nothing else really, but, because, we can't have people not punished for sexual inconstancy. He's a thwackum. Pamela is rewarded for her sexual constancy, her sexual her refusal to engage sexually until she gets the highest bidder out of it, until she gets to be Mrs. B. Tom Jones has an enormous amount of very pragmatic ideas around humans and sex. Now, this is an epic, and Fielding is taking human nature as its basis. There is not a single character who is actually punished by the end of the novel for their sexual nature. Not a single one. And yet I say this is a really moral book. So Tom is obviously at the centre of this. Tom has a body count ultimately of 4, if we count his wife. There's Molly Seagram, there's Mrs. Waters, and there's Lady Bellaston. Bridget Allworthy. The uptight, very, everyone assumes she's going to be the hardest on the infant Tom. She's got 2. And one of them she wasn't married to. We have Mrs. Waters. Mrs. Waters, who has, we're not entirely certain how many. We certainly see about 3 or 4 in the book. There is Captain Waters. There is the gentleman, the soldier, who is attempting to rape her, but is prevented by Tom, which is how they meet. And she he's actually attempting to rob her, because they had been going to run off to Bath together behind the back of Captain Waters. There is Tom, and there is Mr. Fitzpatrick. So she's got a few. And although Mr. Allworthy does sort of speak a lecture to her, that's the limits of what happens to her in terms of punishment for this. I mean, he also speaks lectures to Tom, so it's hardly a severe punishment that she is afforded for her engaging in sexually. Molly Seagram has at least 3, which is why that there is questions about the identity of the father of her unborn child, because it might be Tom, it might be the guy before her, and then Squire decides that, you know what, if Tom doesn't want her anymore, I'll have her. Which is part of the reason why Squire is not as harsh as Thwackum or Bliffle. He actually knows that Tom hasn't betrayed his peccadillos, shall we say. So it's part of the reason why Squire actually confesses, why he is part of the reveal. So if it's not a book about punishing sexuality, in what way is this a moral story? Well, Fielding's great heroine is called Sophia. Now, this is also an epic. It is a novel, but he's also playing with the concept of epic, and he brings the ancients in. He's constantly bringing the ancients in. Again, in this novel, he talks about the critic, which ties us to Pope's essay on criticism. He's constantly talking about the critic. As much as he brings the ancients into this novel, he is also very, very conscious of the fact that this is a consumable. It is a consumable, and that earthly considerations have to take precedence. So he does talk a great deal about the critic. He does talk a great deal about the physical needs of his characters. I've never seen a book where they talk so much about food, where characters eat so often. And so we have this epic, but we are always calling back to this epic. And Sophia is a character that the character of Sophia was modelled on his wife, Charlotte, who died. So Sophia is, in some respects, an elegy to his wife. This is why Sophia has all these great and wonderful characteristics. Sophia is never seen in exactly a poor light. People around her cause the conflict, not her, especially herself. And so Sophia is this shining thing at the center of the novel. But Sophia also means wisdom. Sophia is the word for wisdom. And it's not just wisdom, it is it's holy wisdom. The Santa Sophia, it's holy wisdom. The whole novel, this whole novel that takes the structure of a ancient epic, the banishment, the wandering, and then the return of its hero, Tom. Tom is constantly accompanied as if by a goddess, as if by the goddess Athena, as if by any of the ancient goddesses that you see in any of the ancient epics. He is constantly accompanied by this image, often internal, often this thing that he loves, this person that he loves beyond measure, internally, and he catches glimpses of her muff, her pocketbook. He hunts her down, like he hunts her down not to persecute her, but to return her pocketbook with her £100 note in it. He is very aware that and we see over and over and over again what imprudent matches will look like, what a match made by people who cannot support themselves does. And can you call it love if you are dragging the person that you love into beggary? We see it with the relation of Mrs. Miller, who attempts to turn highwaymen to feed his children and provide medicine for his wife. It was a love match, and they have nothing to live on. We see it in Nightingale and Mrs. Miller's daughter, that Nightingale has engaged in a love affair, but once, knowing that his father will not approve of this. His cousin likewise engages in a love affair and runs away. We see Mr. and Mrs. Harriet Fitzpatrick and her husband, and the appalling marriage they make. And we see how Fitzpatrick pursued Harriet not out of love, but out of love for her fortune, out of desire to get her money. And she is miserable because of this. She is miserable in this match. We see over and over again all of these signs that are basically saying, no, this romantic idea is not practicable if you can't actually have any money to live. So Sophia is not, for the bulk of the book, for Tom, Sophia is not just this romantic ideal. Sophia also represents wisdom. And we see a good-natured child in Tom. But he's not wise. He puts his trust in Black George, the poacher turned gamekeeper, the man who robs him of £500 when he finds him despairing after being thrown out of Squire Allworthy's house. In spite of everything, in spite of Tom being probably the greatest friend that Black George ever had, he robs him. He robs him at his most vulnerable. We see Tom immoderate in his affections. He yes, Molly Seagram is a cheap baggage. There is no other way of saying that. But then he quickly transfers his affection to Sophia, not necessarily with a hope of actually material success there. He has no estate. He has no even really legal position. He is a foundling. And so, but we see this he instinctively does turn towards her. It takes a bit, he's a bit erring on it. He's a bit erring, but he is still very deeply attracted to her. He is deeply attracted to wisdom. The models of wisdom that we are given are Thwackum and Square, and neither of those are particularly attractive to him. They're very punishing and they are very punitive. Whereas we have a model that we start to see Tom align with at the beginning of the novel, and it's Squire Allworthy himself. So once he's turned out, he turns to go sailor or soldier. Both of these with the idea of losing himself, of he is rather hopeless of any sort of future. He does not see that. Sailor and soldier are both short-lived professions. These are not professions that you grow old in, especially at a time of war. And we see sailors and soldiers, and these are not wise men or men that you want to emulate. These are fairly rough men. We see them in the press gang at the end of the novel. We see them among the soldiers, where ideas of honour and virtue are all well and good, but they don't really resemble the rough lives of actual soldiers. So Tom continues along, and he has no problem having little fling with Mrs. Walters, especially since Mrs. Walters is only too happy to, yes, herself, given that she is the instigator of this. However, by the time we get to London and Lady Bellaston treats him in a similar manner, Tom is he's very much going through the motions rather than actually having any desire, because the thing that he is constantly seeking is his Sophie. He wants her. He sees the entanglement with Lady Bellaston, which is not of his choosing, not of his making, and he is being forced into this in order to get access to Sophie, as a hindrance. He actually, you know, his thought is, how do I get out of this as quickly as humanly possible? He does not want to remain in this dire strait. And it's actually Sophie giving him the £100 that he had given to her, returned to her, that allow him to escape this. So he has been forced into this because he has no money, and he's basically being kept. But it is actually wisdom, this virtuous wisdom, that allows him to disentangle himself from Lady Bellaston. So by bestowing on him that money, it's also Sophie who gives him the money, the little money that he has on his trip to London because of the theft of Black George. Sophie instantly hearing that this terrible thing, that he's been stripped naked and turned out of doors, not exactly true, but Honor has a tendency to exaggerate things. She gives him money that what little ready cash she actually has. She doesn't often have much money on her because her father just buys her whatever she wants. So she very rarely has money, but she very quickly gives that to Tom. So wisdom is constantly resupplying him at times of absolute dire need, when he is turned out of doors and when he needs to extricate himself from Lady Bellaston, because his own sense of this is not good is plaguing him by this point. He wants to get out of this situation because it's hindering his attaining, his getting close to wisdom, to Sophie. So by the and there is a moment when he goes to see Nightingale's father to try and plead for his son and his marriage, and he decides that first of all, what he does is, because Nancy has the news of what's happened has taken over the whole household. Mrs. Miller's in an uproar. Nancy is in despair, and Tom is horrified by what his friend Nightingale has unleashed onto this little family, for whom reputation is the only thing keeping them financially stable, and an unwed pregnant daughter is not something that can afford to get abroad. So Tom goes and remonstrates with Nightingale. Nightingale has not liked his betrayal of Nancy at all anyway, and Tom speaks to Nightingale in very much the same sort of language that Mr. Allworthy would use. So Tom, throughout his struggle, throughout his trials on this journey, is getting closer and closer and closer to the man who he would look upon, who he has always looked upon as the finest, greatest man in his life, the most wise and the most generous benefactor that he could possibly imagine, imagining him only to be his adoptive father, his protector. Tom has never spoken ill of Mr. Allworthy either. He never once speaks ill of Mr. Allworthy. But he speaks to Nightingale using the kind of language that you could imagine Mr. Allworthy would use to Nightingale. And convinces Nightingale to go and visit, and he will go and try and reconcile something with his father. Ultimately, it takes Tom and Mr. Allworthy to reconcile Nightingale to his son's marriage, which is interesting because both of them are then, by the end of the novel, following that same playbook. They are both speaking from the same hymn sheet, as it were. The whole novel is this story of Tom growing into not just a good and pleasant person, but an upstanding, a moral person, a person who understands where the limits are. And he's rewarded. He is not punished for his sexual intemperance. He is rewarded for his growing into wisdom and his growing into the goodness that he deserves to have. Mr. Allworthy is able to see Tom through the accounts of people like Mrs. Miller and Mr. Nightingale, people who are not clouded by the knowledge that Tom is illegitimately born, that are not clouded by prejudice of Squire and Thwackum and society, but who are seeing Tom through his generous acts, his preservation of the highwaymen by giving them money, or the would-be highwaymen, the rather lousy highwaymen, his preservation of Nancy, all of these things that are for Mrs. Miller. She defends Tom to Mr. Allworthy's face. She attacks Blifil for his attacks on Tom. She refuses to believe that Tom actually would have killed Mr. Fitzpatrick. So Tom, through learning wisdom, learning moderation, is not he's not punished for his past actions, but his good actions are able to be seen for what they are, and he is able to be seen for what he is, because now, instead of being a good person with wild actions, who acts without thinking all the time and does fairly intemperate things regardless, and doesn't consider how they look, he now is shown and has witness to the fact that he is a good person, and it shows to all the world that he is a good person, including Lord Fellamar. Lord Fellamar, who has been told by Lady Bellaston, and who's the one who sets the press gang on him, that he's just a vagabond and a ruffian, but when he sees him, he and the head of the press gang actually are the ones who bail him out of the gatehouse, because it's like, we were told you were some vagabond, but this is a gentleman. If I'd known it was a gentleman, I would never have done such a thing. So Tom is able to reconcile his outside and his inside. He is actually able to show himself as good, but he has the wisdom in order to be able to moderate his goodness in a way that it is actually functional, rather than just his childish goodness to Black George, which is treated as ingratitude. But all his goodness that he bestows in London is repaid 1,000 times by the enormous friendship of the people that he meets there, and their continuous happiness. And he doesn't do the good. It's not good out of self-interest. His childish good is good out of self-interest. But his good in London is good for the sake of it being good, which is the only reason to, you don't do good for selfish interests. You don't do good to look good. You don't do good because it makes other people admire you. you do good because it is the right thing to do. He doesn't do these things for praise or anything else, but he earns through his goodness friendship and praise, and is paid back 1,000-fold for what he actually suffers. It is a moral tale, but it's a moral tale that is much more subtle and is not... It's also it's a tale that says people are reformable. People are not set in stone. People have choices, and they should be allowed to grow and not be held back by choices that are made at moments of immaturity or weakness, or in fact even be held back by choices that their parents made. So Tom, who by a, moralist standard, a Victorian standard, but even a Richardson standard, should be punished and pushed down, is elevated because he seeks wisdom and ultimately finds wisdom, which is what happens to a hero. He is an epic hero because an epic hero does return home and is rewarded. So you take that epic, but you also take the novel. You take this arc of a character, which you do not see in a picaresque novel. So you do have a character arc, and I would say, in spite of its reputation as a very sexy book, which it is, there's no saying that it isn't. It's very sensual. It's very interested in sexual mores, but at the same time, it's much more pragmatic. It is a very moral book, and it is a far more moral book than one that is all damnation and punishment. So those are my thoughts on Tom Jones 25 years after having first read it. If you have not read Tom Jones, read it. It's really, really good. I'll link to the audiobook that I listened to, because I quite like the narrator. I did find that the audiobook was a little bit slow, so I did listen to it on 1.25 speed. It wasn't enough to speed it up, but it sort of got it up to where I would read, like my reading speed. My reading speed needed to be, for me to, just to read it at an appropriate speed. It was just a little bit too slow at regular speed, so keep that in mind if you start listening to it and think this is a bit slow. Just quarter of a bit to speed it up. But it is a very long book. It took me many, many weeks to get through it. But absolutely, if you know nothing of the 18th century literature, it is a really great place to start. It's not really difficult like Sterne, and it's not sort of moralizing like Richardson. It's fun. It's very engaging. It has extraordinary characters who you do remember. Like, I had no trouble knowing exactly who everyone was in spite of not reading it for 20 years, because they are so memorable. So I highly, highly recommend Tom Jones. It is a great place to start. If you've read it, let me know what you think. If you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. That's Tom Jones. Take 2. I hope you enjoyed this. This is really, really long, but there was a lot to talk about, and it's a big book. And the original video is about 10 minutes long, so it probably deserved a longer video this time around. I had more to say. So, yes, Henry Fielding really can be said to invent what we now consider a true novel, a considered complete narrative. Coleridge apparently called it one of the most perfect narratives. So there you go. It is not always the most easy language to get into, but if you've read a lot of the other stuff that we've had a look at, he is the Pope, the Swift, these things do help. He's constantly making references to contemporary figures. Handel is mentioned, Garrick, because Fielding came off the stage, Hogarth, various different political moments are mentioned. So it's very, very grounded in their world. And the more you know about the world, the more you can appreciate that about this novel and the way that this novel works. So definitely is Joseph Andrews' elder brother. Technically he's his younger brother, but in terms of maturity of work, he is the elder brother of those two works. So if you enjoyed Joseph Andrews, you'll love Tom Jones. So I will be back with our new direction of like a little series I want to put together now that I've got all the books I had to buy. So I will be back with that next time. Janice will be here next week. Sorry about usurping her place, but I finished the book and I didn't want to wait a week to do that, so my turn. So anyway, I will be back with, and it might be I might take a bit of time because I have a bunch of different things that I need to read and think about for my to really flesh out my thesis with these works. So I might not have a couple of videos in circulation for a bit, but I will be up again with that in a few weeks. And until then, farewell. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.